Welcome to Blooms and Barnacles bonus episode number 17, and it's the 5th in our series on Dubliners. How are you doing today, Dermot?
Pretty good.
All right. So we've read some Dubliners stories. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon, too. I should put in there. We read some Dubliners stories, and we're going to talk about them. Which stories do we read, Dermot?
One of
Do you know the titles?
the happy ones. What's the one about the awful employee that does the child cruelty?
That'd be Counterparts.
Counterparts. And Clay, about a little house servant type person who works in the laundry. Not a Magdalene laundry, we'll get to that, I guess. But it's some sort of like church laundry.
It's about the Protestants, you see, so they're not vicious like the Catholic ones.
One was very bleak.
All right, and that's the first one we're going to talk about, which is Counterparts. I'm hoping you're all reading along at home, but just in case you need a refresher, Dermot is going to give a quick summary of what happens in Counterparts.
Counterparts begins in some sort of awful, I forget what the work was, but legal, right? They're doing legal forms.
The law office, solicitor's office. Yeah.
And it's all with quill pens and old-timey stuff, so probably pretty bleak. They do have a type, somebody's going to type up all the handwritten garbage. And it's the boss from hell, and he's torturing the employee from hell. So it's all hell for everyone, including the son of the employee. And the boss is from Northern Ireland, so I guess that makes him like really scary too. And he basically, do you remember the Mitchell and Webb sketch, Pennington?
Yes.
I was reminded of that constantly. Or Hennemore. Okay. And poor Hennemore can't do anything right, and the boss always yells at him because no matter what Hennemore does, he will always be wrong. Through more and more elaborate.
I remember though, Hennemore is always very, very wrong.
Very catastrophically wrong. Yeah. So I get the sense that Farrington is in the same. The employee from hell is sort of in this position, and he has completely let himself go. He's slipping out of work 5 times a day to drink. Absolutely, almost literally penniless. Like he's down to 1 penny when he gets his last pint to go back to work so he can endure the job a little bit more. Little confession here, during the mid-2000s I worked for Disney Mobile in North Hollywood, and every Wednesday was our favorite Japanese restaurant day, and I would get like a little glass of Chablis, a nice little white wine, wasn't too bad. And then one day the lovely Japanese lady just turned to me and said, we have these in carafes. And I said, you can bring me the carafe. And every Wednesday I would just go back to work on a cloud, but it was only on Wednesday. There were occasional vodka screwdrivers, which I very recommend that because you can hide it like it's orange juice. That was Robert Mitchum's old trick back in the day.
That is many people's old trick.
Yes, it's great. No, you could dose it, so you just got to, you got to be very responsible about your alcohol abuse. Yeah. But I get the sense Farrington is he's approaching the red zone where Claxon should be going when your money's running out. His body's very big from all the porter sloshing around, and his face is purple, so he's probably on the brink of some kind of like medical catastrophe as well. So yeah, it's a fairly bleak life he has. And I'll wait till later to talk about it, but it's like the old Philip Larkin poem, "Man hands on misery to man that deepens like a coastal shelf," and he passes on his suffering down the chain of command to somebody lower than him down the pyramid, which is great because you got to pass on the tradition to the next generation.
Is that the poem that begins with "They fuck you up, your mom and dad"?
They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time are soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself. Cheerful fellow. If anybody actually pulls on you in a pub, you probably want to walk away. Trying to impress you by how deep they are.
If there's some nerd you meet who just can quote that entire poem off from memory, without any planning or preparation, that's someone I should be concerned about.
Avoid.
I should avoid them, especially if they dress in all black and have sort of an imperious nature to them.
And Trotsky glasses.
Yeah. All right, watch out for that guy. Don't spend all your time with that guy.
Like a plague.
Okay.
Too late now, my dear.
Yep. All right. Well, let's get into it. I have a bunch of disparate thoughts. I think I found the sentiment when we were looking at After the Race, but I also found it in some of the scholarship around Counterparts, is that this is a particularly neglected Dubliner story by scholars. And my first thought as a non-scholar is like, oh, because it's so depressing. But I think the reason is just they like to go after the stories with a lot of allegory and subtext in it. And this one is seen as being all text, no subtext. Like, it's pretty clear what he's going for, and there's not a whole lot of digging to do. Did you feel that way when you read it?
It felt very direct, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I get the allegory appeal and everything, but there should be more to it. Like, it's a very kitchen sink drama, Ibsen-esque, I guess. This is what life is like for a lot of people, just sheer unadulterated misery.
Yeah. What do you think the title means, Counterparts?
Counterparts. Oh, I would guess perhaps like he's the counterpart of the boss to himself, to his own son.
And I would say he is also Mr. Farrington is also the counterpart to his son Tom as a victim of abuse, and so the cycle continues.
The Prophet Muhammad saw a man beating a slave, and Muhammad said to the man, God has more power over you than you have over that slave. And the man was so horrified he freed the slave on the spot, according to the hadith anyway. So,
okay.
But yeah, this fella doesn't get the memo.
No. Yeah. One little Easter egg, I suppose, if you could call it that, but I would say Easter eggs are something that's fun to find. I don't know if this is any fun, but Elaine and Crosby, or Crosby and Elaine, are the solicitors that Mr. Farrington works for. They do get a mention in Ulysses. You'd be forgiven for not remembering it, though we did touch on it in episode 95 of the main feed, where Bloom recalls someone by the name of Peake. I believe he's appearing in an obituary because it's in Hades, and Bloom tries to recall if it is Peake from Crosby and Elaine's, and then realizes it's a different Peake. So Peake is mentioned in Counterparts. It says, he had been obliged to offer an abject apology to Mr. Elaine for his impertinence, but he knew what a hornet's nest the office would be for him. This is after Farrington got in his little dunk on his boss. He could remember the way in which Mr. Elaine had hounded little Peake out of the office in order to make room for his own nephew. So that's it. He just stands as a victim of nepotism, but isn't really a character on the page. The name Elaine is a name from Joyce's real life. Elaine is an asshole boss, and he is based on an asshole boss of John S. Joyce, James's father, called Elaine, Alleyn, with no E. And this real Elaine scammed the company out of a lot of money, which hurt John Joyce in the end, and hurt the Joyce family. And I'm sure young James heard plenty about that, and remembered the name, and then put it into the story as vengeance. Yeah, I would say it's hard to dig into this. A few thoughts that come to mind. I would say one way you could approach the discussion of Counterparts is in terms of gender dynamics. Farrington, I think, is a man who wants to assert himself, these sort of traditional masculine quote-unquote values, of being a leader and being kind of master of your own universe and whatnot. And he definitely ends up in the subservient role under the guy who has a lot more money, and with Miss Delacour, her attention, and Farrington, he wants to be the cool guy with the money and the wealthy widows paying attention to him. And so he kind of tries to get the upper hand by making him, his little, I can't remember what his quip was anymore, but he makes fun of his boss in front of Miss Delacour. And then those tables then are turned on him when he's out with all of his friends in the pub, and he's trying to get the attention of the woman in the peacock scarf. She also really has no interest in him. Right. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And then the one woman in his life whose attention he does technically have is his wife. And do you remember how she is described as being this sort of mean, cold, sharp-faced little woman who hates his guts?
She's cruel to him when he's sober, and he's cruel to her when he's drunk.
Yeah. So those are the women in his life, and he wants to be the cool, dashing, manly man in all their eyes, and he knows he isn't. Yeah. And he's failed in front of them in all three different ways. One, by being a subservient employee. Another, just by not attracting a woman's attention in a bar, and she favors the acrobats or circus performers.
Yes. Yeah.
But they're English too.
Yeah.
So he's subservient then to English And then in his own home, in a traditional view, is the man should be the head of the household. And I think he knows he's not. And the only way he can assert his dominance in his own little fiefdom there is by being a drunken, ragey abuser. So his irrationality is really him being driven to defend his masculine pride. You know, he smarts off to his boss. He arm wrestles, and I believe he loses pretty spectacularly. And then when these two attempted displays of masculinity don't work, he goes and finds someone vulnerable who can't defend themselves, finds a pretext, the fire went out, and then beats the hell out of his son.
You find yourself a little boy and you beat the shit.
And that's what we call the cycle of abuse.